Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. Sentinels are an incredibly popular unit in the Imperial Guard community. Many players own at least one squadron of them, and thanks to the Cadia Stands box set, a lot of the newer players getting into the Astra Militarum have at least got one or two of these things lying around. And whilst the big boys of the motor pool have got a lot of attention with the new Guard Codex, like the Leman Russ and the Baneblade and the Rogol Dawn, I know that many of us are looking to try and find a way of making our favourite Ewok Hunter 9000s work on the battlefield. Well, good news, Sentinel fans, because your boy MG over here has found a way to build an incredibly tough unit of Sentinels that many factions in Warhammer 40k will find almost impossible to kill. And with that bold statement made, let's crack on with today's video. Now, the first thing to mention is I am going to be focusing on armored Sentinels. Scout Sentinels are great, but they're a little bit less durable than the armored versions. And thanks to some of the keywords that the armored versions has, you can make it incredibly tough. Now, talking about armored Sentinels, they actually do start off pretty durable just at a base level. Each Armored Sentinel comes with 7 wounds, it's got a toughness of 6 and a 3+ save. You also get a special rule called Armored Cockpit, which gives you an additional +1 save versus damage 1 weapons. This makes your Armored Sentinel pretty tough against any kind of small arms. I mean, if someone shoots you with a bolter or bolter equivalent, you're going to have a 2+ save. Even if they hit you with something that has an inbuilt AP -1, such as Tau Pulse Rifles, you're still going to have a 3+ save against that shot. In most cases, the Armored Cockpit is going to make your opponent's incoming fire much less efficient, and it's going to put them in a really tricky position. Because on the one hand, Armored Sentinels and Sentinels in general are quite light armor, and so most of the time your opponent's instinct is going to be, well, I'll clear those away or I'll make a good dent in them with my small arms, my bolters, assault bolters, all that kind of good stuff. But if he does that, more often than not, it's just going to bounce off, and Sentinels become some sort of weird giant Terminator for the Guard army with that 2+ save. But then it means if your opponent comes in with a big las cannon or something else, that's some serious anti-tank, more often than not, that is massive overkill. And so that's not an efficient use of his big guns, which in an ideal situation would be going into your Leman Russes. So as you can see, just from the off, these guys are built to be annoyingly durable. And what we're going to do is take that annoying durability and just dial it up to 11. The first way we're going to do that is by looking at the Sentinel's keywords. Now, despite the fact that the Sentinel is a vehicle, it does come with the regimental keyword, which means that it can receive regimental orders. That's right, your Sentinel can get orders from your Castellans, your command squads, and your commissars. The impact of this is that you can actually order your Sentinel to take cover. And by ordering it to take cover, you give it the benefit of light cover, which means that its 3+ save goes straight up to a 2+ save. And if you are being hit by a damage 1 weapon, your Sentinel is now up to a 1+ save. This just straight up makes you immune to most small Daka energy out there, because even if someone does have some kind of inbuilt -1 on their basic gun profile, it doesn't matter. You're still on a 2+ save against damage 1 weapons. So now that we have made our chicken walkers immune to most light fire, we now need to take it a step further and make them resistant to medium damage guns. Medium damage weapons tend to be things like heavy bolters and autocannon equivalents, things that are going to have a strength of 5 or 6 or 7, have an AP of 1 or 2, and typically come in at 2 damage. Now, it's really important to note that a lot of factions in 40k rely upon these medium strength weapons to get the job done. These weapons are very popular with the Warhammer community because they tend to tick all of the boxes. They have a good rate of fire, which allows them to kill infantry, high enough AP to threaten medium and armored targets, and also a flat damage of 2, which tends to be able to deal with most light medium infantry. And if it does go into a vehicle, enough of them will make sure of a armor target in fairly quick order. On paper, these weapons are perfectly designed for cutting through light armor like Sentinels. They've got a high enough strength to be able to equal or just about exceed your toughness, meaning they're going to be wounding you typically on 4s, and then they have a decent enough armor penetration characteristic where your 3+ save starts becoming a little bit thin, and also the flat damage of 2 means that they only need to get 3 or 4 of these shots through, and one of your Sentinels is going to fall over. And like we said, they've got a high enough rate of fire where it's not unrealistic whether they will be able to do that. But fear not, lovers of the Sentinel butt plug, for I have a way of making your Sentinels resistant to this traditional hard counter. But fear not, lovers of the Sentinel butt plug, because the guard stratagems have got you covered, and they are going to make you be able to resist this traditional hard counter. The first thing we need to do is try and counter that high volume of fire, and the best way of doing that is by making your Sentinels harder to hit. And this is easy to do because you can just use the smoke screen stratagem. Smoke screen costs 1 command point. You use it in your opponent's shooting phase when he goes to target your Sentinels, and it gives them a -1 to hit modifier. And this quite simply just means that despite the fact your opponent will have a decent rate of fire with 2 or 3 shots coming out of his guns, most of the time he's now only going to hitting with half of them, which means he'll only be getting 1 to 2 hits rather than 2 to 3 hits with his guns. Less hits means less damage, which overall makes Sentinels more durable. This smokescreen stratagem is not just good for countering that medium damage weaponry, it is good for countering all kinds of weaponry. If it's small arms, if it's medium arms, or even if it is the big heavy guns, being able to slap a -1 to hit modifier on your Sentinels is just a great way of directly boosting their survivability. Now, in addition to smokescreen, armored Sentinels also get access to the ablative plating stratagem. This costs 2 command points for a full squadron of Sentinels, but it is going to give you a reduced damage by 1, and you can use it in both the shooting phase or the fight phase. The impact of this is all of those damage 2 weapons from those medium strength guns are now going to become damage 1 weapons. So not only have you put a -1 to hit modifier on the front end, which means that you've cut the amount of hits coming in, but now even if your opponent does get lots of hits, it's going to take double the number of wounds through in order to be able to topple even just a single Sentinel. He needs to do 7 unsaved wounds to you to kill 1 walker, whereas before he needed to get 4 through. What's really bonkers about this is it stacks with your armored cockpit rule that we talked about before, which gives you a +1 save against damage 1 weapons. That's right, because you have reduced the damage by 1, so the attacker's gone from 2 damage to 1 damage. Because it's only 1 damage, you are now getting +1 save against it. That means if someone hits you with a weapon like a heavy bolter, you're still going to have a 2-up save against that attack. It means if someone hits you with something like a cyclic ion raker, you're still going to have a 3-up save, even if they overcharge that weapon. But you know what's even better than being able to reduce incoming enemy fire? Not taking any enemy return fire at all. You see, Sentinels have access to the Maverick Maneuver stratagem, which costs 1 command point. What this stratagem allows you to do is move after you have made a shooting attack. Now, you can only make a 6-inch move, but what it essentially allows you to do is hide your Sentinels behind a piece of line of sight blocking terrain. In your movement phase, you move them out. You then spend 1 CP on Maverick Maneuvers. They make a shooting attack, and then you move them 6 inches back behind that line of sight blocking terrain, essentially meaning that they're hidden once again, and when it goes over to your opponent's turn, unless he has some kind of indirect fire, there's a very high chance he won't be able to see them and he won't be able to return fire on them. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Mordianglory, why didn't you just do a video about the Maverick Maneuver stratagem? Because that essentially makes them unkillable if they can't be targeted. And all these other things that you've talked about, like smokescreen and ablative plating and take cover, they don't really matter if you can just jump, shoot, jump, right? Well, dear viewer, I'm going to pull an M. Night Shyamalan twist on you and say, why are you only thinking about having 1 unit of Sentinels when you could have 2 units of unkillable Sentinels? That's right, Sentinels are so cheap that you can easily afford to put 2 squadrons of them in your army, and you could have one of them jump, shoot, jumping every turn and staying almost impossible to kill that way, and then you've got another unit of Sentinels that can be stomping up the battlefield, fully buffed up, taking these incoming punches and still being able to hit back. Why pick? Why not have your cake and eat it? Why not both? Now, I'll give you a moment to pick yourselves up off the floor, assuming that you have fallen off your chairs in surprise with your expectations thoroughly subverted. Now let's move on to the next kind of firepower that we want to make our Sentinels resistant to. That is the big guns, the proper anti-tank firepower. Now we have a couple of options here, and the first one is the good old-fashioned, the classic Tech Priest Engine Seer, or as he is now known in the new codex, the Regimental Engine Seer. This cheeky chappy has a couple of fantastic abilities that are a great way of making your Sentinels even tougher. The first one is he can do the Battlefield Repairs ability, and this allows you to heal D3 wounds on a Sentinel. Being able to put an average of 2 wounds back on your Sentinels every single turn is very important because it's a great way of keeping your walkers in the fight for longer, and it's also incredibly frustrating for your opponent to have to deal with. Remember, we're trying to make the Sentinels annoyingly durable. Imagine if you are your opponent and you've just poured loads of firepower into Sentinels to find that you've just chipped a couple of wounds off one of them. But hey, at least you did something with your small arms. Next time you'll direct some big firepower against them. Well, suddenly your Tech Priest Engine Seer just comes out and he wiggles his bum and he presses a few buttons and he throws some incense on the Sentinel, and now it's back up to full fighting strength. When you then go to shoot your las cannon or las cannon equivalent at that Sentinel next turn, because it's now back up to its full 7 wounds, even if you do get the shot through and you do get the wound through and you do cause the maximum amount of damage, you get that flat 6 damage, great. Well, it's still alive because it has 7 wounds. So it's really good being able to put a couple of wounds back on, because not only just generally does it make them tougher, but it also means that it keeps them even more durable against those big weapons which have got lots of damage potential. Little side note here, but by having 7 wounds, Sentinels are inherently just really frustrating to deal with, because if you hit them with a bunch of damage to guns, instead of needing like 3 to go through to kill one, you need 4 to go through to kill one. And instead of being able to kill one in a single shot with a big las cannon hit, you need to put 2 las cannon hits into them. So overall, it just makes them really frustrating to deal with and means that you're constantly having to put an extra shot in every single time just to cause one of these things to fall over. Now, your friendly neighborhood cogboy also has another cool new ability on his datasheet, which is the Omnissiah's Blessing. And what this allows you to do is select one vehicle in your command phase and give it a 5+ invulnerable save. Now, I want to stress something very important here. I have read this rule, I have read it again. It does not say one vehicle unit, it specifically says one vehicle. That means even if you have a squadron of 3 Sentinels, you're going to have to pick which one of the Sentinels in the squadron is going to get the 5+ invulnerable save. It is a small yet very important distinction because it is going to affect how you allocate wounds on the battlefield, because if you decide you're going to start putting small arms fire on a Sentinel that doesn't have the 5+ invulnerable save, because once you start allocating wounds to a model, you have to keep allocating wounds to it. Your opponent might bait you out, make you put it on a non-invulnerable save Sentinel, and then hit you with something big, and you can't then decide to start taking the wounds on the Sentinel with invulnerable save. You've got to keep putting it on the basic bitch. So it's just important to remember, and typically what I would say is just put your damage on the invulnerable save one, because he's still going to be pretty durable against all those small arms with the other buffs that we've talked about. And it means that when your opponent does try and hit you with a big gun, you're going to be able to put it on that Sentinel that we've given a 5+ invulnerable save to specifically be able to resist those high damage weapons. Now, despite the fact that the Omnissiah's Blessing is slightly fiddly, the Tech Priest Engine Seer is absolutely worth it. He is only 40 points. That's incredibly cheap. He would be worth it just for his repair ability. The fact that he can put out a 5+ invulnerable save as well is fantastic. So if you're thinking about taking some Sentinels and you want to make them as durable as possible, you cannot go wrong with chucking a cheap Tech Priest Engine Seer in there to keep them ticking over. Now, if you don't mind a visit from your local commissar, you can also use Psychers to buff up your Sentinels and make them really resistant to those big punchy guns. And there are two psychic powers that you're really going to want to think about putting on your squadron of Sentinels. The first one is Psychic Barrier, and this gives a unit, not just one model like the Tech Priest, but the unit a 5+ invulnerable save. I would say that Psychic Barrier is probably superior to the Omnissiah's Blessing. Yes, Inquisitor, this comment right here. But what I would also point out is that you do have to pass a psychic test for Psychic Barrier, but you don't have to do that for the Omnissiah's Blessing. It's very important to know because even though Psychic Barrier can affect all of the Sentinels, there's a chance that you'll fail the power or that your opponent will simply deny it. Because of this, I would actually say that they're both equal, but however you slice it up, you can use Psychic Barrier and a Tech Priest to be able to get some form of 5+ invulnerable save across 2 units of Sentinels. Now, a 5+ is all well and good. It is going to stop 33% of all incoming damage, statistically speaking. But what's even better than a 5+ invulnerable save is just not having to roll a save at all, and this is where Night Shroud comes in. Now, for those of you that don't know what trans hit is, it is a term that is used by the competitive community to describe abilities that mean that you can only ever be hit on a 4+. Essentially, whenever your opponent rolls a hit dice and they roll a 1 to 3, it doesn't matter if their ballistic skill is 2+, doesn't matter if their ballistic skill is 3+, they can only ever hit you on a 4, 5, or 6. If you're familiar with Space Marines, either playing them or playing against them, it's very similar to transhuman physiology, except rather than you can only be wounded on a 4, 5, or 6. This takes place in the to hit step of the shooting action, and instead it means you can only ever be hit on a 4, 5, or 6. Trans hit abilities are incredibly powerful and very, very popular in the competitive scene. And why wouldn't they? Statistically, they just halve all incoming damage straight off the bat. And if you combine Night Shroud with Psychic Barrier, you're looking at a unit that is going to halve the incoming number of las cannon shots and then be able to save a third of those shots that even do make it through. This is going to mean that those low volume of shots that you get from those big punchy weapons are really going to struggle to actually end up getting through all of the buffs and going on to the damage step on the other side. Now, I do want to make a quick little side note here on Guard Psychers. It's important to remember that whilst you can take a cheap Astropath and put him in one of your command squads that you were probably taking anyway, the Astropath does have a limited number of spells. He can only do the first 3 powers in the Psychana discipline, which means he does have access to Psychic Barrier, but he doesn't have access to Night Shroud. On the flip side, the Primaris Psyker is more expensive, coming in at 60 points, but he does have access to all of the Psychana powers, which means he can know Psychic Barrier and Night Shroud, and because he can cast 2 powers a turn, he can do both of them in a single psychic phase. The Primaris Psyker is more expensive, but he is probably worth it. The only thing that might hold him back and might make you think, you know what, I'd rather go for the Astropath, is the fact that he does take up a viable HQ slot in your army. And with Arcs of Omen just around the corner, you're only going to have access to 4 HQ slots. That could be a problem. What I would advise is take a look at your list, see what HQ slots you're using. If you're running short, go for the Astropath, accept the fact you will have Night Shroud. If you've got one spare, definitely go for that Primaris Psyker. So when we add all of these buffs together, what is the end result? Well, you can have a unit of Armored Sentinels, which is going to have 21 wounds. It's going to be toughness 6 with a 1+ save against damage 1 weapons and a 2+ save against everything else. It's going to reduce the damage of any incoming attack by 1 to a minimum of 1, and it's only ever going to be able to be hit on a 4, 5, or 6. If you do not get the transit power off, you still have access to a -1 to hit stratagem with Smokescreen, and you also have many sources of 5+ invulnerable save. And even if your opponent does manage to get through all of those buffs and do some damage to your armored walkers, you still can heal D3 wounds a turn. On top of all this, you can use a stratagem to give them jump, shoot, jump, which means either you can have a fully buffed up, completely mega maxed out armored sentinel unit, or you can field 2 of these bad boys, have one of them with all the durability gubbins, and then have another one which is being safe by just being able to move, shoot, move back, and avoid enemy fire. Either way, you are looking at between 3 and 6 Sentinels, which are going to be incredibly difficult for your opponent to deal with. I know there is going to be some people out there saying, is all of this investment worth it? What you have to remember is that this is actually incredibly low investment in terms of both points and command points. You can take 2 units of armor sentinels, and that's going to cost you 135 points per squad for a total of 270 points. If you then add in a single tech priest and an astropath, that's only going to add on another 80 points, which means it comes in at 350 points. You can give all of these sentinels plasma cannons or las cannons, and on top of that, if you've got a few points left over, you could just splurge out and give them 6 hunter killer missiles. That kind of firepower is something that your opponent can't really afford to leave unchecked. In their first volley, your sentinels could be putting out 12 damage D6 shots, which is going to tear a chunk out of any target that you throw them at. In addition to all of this, don't forget that Sentinels easily benefit from the take aim order as well. So if you don't think you need that extra take cover that Armored Cockpit will see you through, you can do take aim, which gives you +1 to hit, +1 AP. Also, remember that you can benefit from the reroll 1s to hit aura of Castellans and the reroll 1s to wound order of the Regimental Standard, because you have the core keyword and the regimental keywords as well. And this is what makes me love the super durable Sentinel tactic, because it's not just a case of being durable, but actually a smart opponent can just ignore them because they're not going to do much damage output anyway, and they're more of a trap unit. No, not at all. They are going to be putting out lots of plasma or las cannons and some hunter killers throughout the game, and so it means that if your opponent does leave them unchecked, they are going to be tearing chunks out of his army. Quite simply, they are a hyper durable unit that has also got fantastic damage potential. But what do you guys think of this strategy? Let me know down in the comment section below. Do you think it's worth it? Would you go for 1 unit of Sentinels or 2 units of Sentinels? Do you prefer the idea of being able to stomp across the board, creating some kind of can wall? Or would you prefer to say, you know what, I'll just go for that 1 and I'll jump, shoot, jump them. That's enough for me. Let me know your preferred ways of running this down in that comment section. If you've enjoyed today's video, then make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Now, if you've really enjoyed today's episode or you have found it particularly helpful, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the big perks of becoming a channel member or Patreon is you do gain access to the mordianglory Discord. And this is an online community with almost 900 active members. It's always popping off. There's always someone for you to chat to. It's a really fun, friendly, and safe community. And it's full of many experienced players as well, making it a very valuable resource. There are rooms in that Discord server for talking about tactics, army lists, painting, hobbying, and even memes as well. It's always popping off, so if that sounds like a load of fun, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Evolution of Gaming, Alan Blunt, Trips Clips, Michael Vosberg, Lee 1955, Levi Hecker, Burgosaurus, Mark Alperin, and Matthew Bishop. Thank you guys for your ongoing channel membership. Thank you for doing your part. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreons too. So thank you to Alan Blunt III, Dale Cromwell, Akashareka, Red Morrison, Nate, and Janet Wicks. Thank you guys. Your Patreon support really does make a big difference. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So I want to say a massive, heartfelt thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, Alex Stengale, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys. Your generous support really makes a huge difference and is a major part of how I'm able to do mordianglory full time. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.